The moment my husband chose his secret family over our marriage. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My husband looked at the photos of his secret toddler, didn't apologize, and simply asked me for the keys to my car. We were standing in the meticulously decorated kitchen of our quiet suburban home, the sanctuary I had spent a decade building for us. On the pristine marble island between us lay the undeniable proof of his complete, world-shattering betrayal. An 8x10 glossy photograph of Greg, my charming husband of 10 years, lifting a little boy with his exact same eyes into the air in front of a house 3 states away. Next to it was a copy of a birth certificate with his name listed clearly as the father. I had expected him to fall to his knees. I had expected tears, frantic explanations, or at least a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, Greg just stared at the picture, his jaw tightening, before looking up at me with eyes so cold I felt the chill deep in my bones. "Where are the car keys, Chloe?" he repeated, his voice perfectly level, completely devoid of any emotion. He wasn't sorry he broke my heart. He was calculating his escape. What do you do when the man you love only exists in your head? You realize you are standing in a room with a complete stranger who has spent the last decade draining your life to fund someone else's. He didn't care about the 10 years of loyalty, the sacrifices I made for his career, or the life we built. His only concern was driving away before the other woman found out his dark secret. He actually thought he could just pack a bag, drain our joint savings accounts, and walk out the door leaving me with the emotional and financial ruins of our shattered marriage. "My keys?" I asked, my voice trembling not from sadness, but from a terrifying, icy rage. "You want my car keys right now?" "Yes, Chloe." "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he sighed, running a hand through his hair like I was the one inconveniencing him. He actually reached for his phone to open his banking app, completely unaware of the trap I had already set. He was about to realize that his perfect double life was already burning to ash. To understand the absolute audacity of Greg's betrayal, you have to understand the flawless illusion we lived in. For 10 years, I believed I was the luckiest woman alive. Greg was a senior logistics consultant, a title that sounded incredibly impressive and conveniently demanded he travel constantly. While other wives complained about their husbands playing golf on weekends, I was packing Greg's pristine garment bags for sudden emergency client meetings in Chicago, Denver, or Atlanta. We met in our mid-20s. He was driven, charismatic, and fiercely protective of his public image. He wanted the perfect suburban life, the beautifully decorated house, the manicured lawn, the successful, supportive wife who handled everything on the home front. And I played that role flawlessly. I put my own career ambitions as an interior designer on the back burner, taking only freelance clients so I could always be available to manage our household, pay the bills, and keep his life completely stress-free. "I couldn't do this without you, Chloe," he would say, kissing my forehead before rushing out the door to catch another red-eye flight. "Every promotion I get, it's for us. We're a team." I believed every single word. I trusted him so deeply that I never once questioned the late-night phone calls he took in the garage, or the fact that his corporate expenses were always heavily redacted. When he said a client needed him for 2 weeks straight, I just asked what suits he wanted dry cleaned. I was completely blinded by my own devotion. I thought we were building an unbreakable foundation for our future family. I didn't know I was simply the unpaid property manager of his primary residence, while he built his actual dream life on my dime. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was entirely structural. He had weaponized my trust and my willingness to sacrifice, using my unwavering support as the perfect cover for his secret life. I was living in a beautiful, comfortable prison of lies. But the universe has a funny way of bringing the truth into the light, and it usually starts with a tiny, insignificant mistake. Everything shattered the morning a random envelope slipped through the cracks of his perfect lies. It was a Tuesday morning. Greg was supposedly in Seattle negotiating a massive supply chain contract. I was sorting through the mail at the kitchen island when I noticed a stark, white envelope mixed in with the utility bills. It was addressed to Greg, but the return address wasn't a bank or his corporate office. It was a pediatric dental clinic located in Oregon. I frowned, sliding my finger under the flap. I assumed it was a bizarre junk mail error or a charity solicitation. But when I unfolded the crisp paper, My heart did a strange, uncomfortable stutter. It was an invoice. An overdue notice for a $450 emergency dental procedure for a patient named Leo, billed directly to Greg's personal name and our home address. I immediately texted him a photo of the bill. "Hey, just got this weird mail. Identity theft?" His reply came almost instantly, which was highly unusual for his busy mornings. "Total scam, babe. Or a mix-up with the insurance at HR. Don't even worry about it. Throw it away. I'll have my assistant flag it with corporate." It was a smooth, plausible excuse. The old Chloe would have tossed the paper into the recycling bin and moved on with her day. But something felt incredibly wrong. The invoice was too detailed. It listed specific teeth numbers and pediatric anesthesia codes. Why would a scammer use a fake child's name for a dental bill? When Greg came home that weekend, he was overly affectionate. He brought me expensive flowers and took me to a high-end dinner, keeping the conversation focused entirely on his stressful trip. I watched him across the candlelit table, his charming smile perfectly in place, but my intuition was screaming like a fire alarm. I couldn't shake the image of the name Leo printed on that clinical white paper. Later that night, while he was fast asleep, I crept out of our bed and walked silently down to the kitchen. I dug the crumpled invoice out of the trash, smoothing the paper flat against the cold marble counter, staring at the numbers. I wasn't crazy. I knew something in our perfect life was terribly wrong. I finally decided it was time to share my dark suspicions with my best friend. Harper is the kind of fiercely loyal best friend who will help you hide a body or audit a tax return, no questions asked. I invited her over for coffee the next morning and slid the crumpled pediatric dental bill across the table. At first, she tried to talk me down from the ledge. She rationalized that it really could be a bizarre administrative glitch, reminding me of how stressful Greg's corporate job was and how easily paperwork gets crossed in massive healthcare systems. But Chloe, Harper said, her eyes narrowing as she tapped her fingernail against the invoice. "If your gut is telling you he's lying, you don't just sit there. You verify. Where's his old backup laptop?" I felt a wave of nausea. Invading his privacy felt like crossing an unforgivable line, but the gnawing anxiety in my chest left me no choice. We pulled his old MacBook out of the guest room closet. Greg was incredibly meticulous, but nobody is perfect at covering their tracks digitally. Harper, who worked in IT, bypassed his basic password in under 5 minutes. We didn't find anything in his primary accounts. But Harper kept digging, checking the autofill cache on his web browser. That's when the pattern interrupt hit me like a physical blow. A login screen populated for a regional bank I had never heard of, located entirely in the Pacific Northwest. "What do you do when the man you love only exists in your head?" Harper whispered, staring at the screen. We managed to reset the password using his secondary, hidden email address, an address I only discovered because it was linked to his old recovery phone number. When the banking portal finally loaded, I stopped breathing. It wasn't a corporate account. It was a joint checking account under Greg's name and a woman named Alyssa. The transaction history was a horrifying map of a completely different life. Mortgage payments, grocery deliveries, utility bills, and regular transfers to a daycare center. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing onto the floor. We were staring directly at the financial blueprint of my husband's deeply hidden second life. The glowing screen of the laptop illuminated my complete devastation. For hours, Harper and I sat in absolute silence, painstakingly cross-referencing the transactions from the secret regional bank account with our own marital finances. It was a masterclass in financial manipulation and deceit. Greg hadn't just been hiding a second family. He had been systematically funneling our money to support them. Every time he claimed his annual corporate bonus was cut, or that he needed to make a high-risk personal investment to secure our retirement, he was actually wiring massive sums of cash to an LLC registered in Oregon. That LLC then cleanly deposited the funds right into the joint account he shared with Alyssa. Over the course of 3 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars of marital assets had simply vanished into this black hole. He was paying the mortgage on a 4-bedroom house for another woman, while telling me we needed to budget tightly if we wanted to renovate our own kitchen. He was buying organic toddler food and paying preschool tuition, while constantly telling me he wasn't ready for us to have children yet because his career was just too unstable. The betrayal was so profound it felt like I was drowning in ice water. This wasn't a drunken one-night stand or a brief emotional affair. This was a parallel universe. He was living a fully realized, deeply committed second life, and I was unwittingly financing it. "Chloe, look at this," Harper said, her voice tight with anger. She pointed to a recurring charge on the secret statement. Every Friday, there was a charge at a local coffee shop in Portland. Every single Friday. Greg's business trips weren't trips at all. He was working remotely from another state, splitting his weeks between two different households, two different lives, and two different women who both thought they were the center of his world. I realized that while I was washing his clothes and holding down the fort in our empty suburban home, he was playing house 3 states away. The sheer logistical effort required to maintain this deception was absolutely terrifying. He was a sociopath. I knew I could not confront him until I saw this nightmare with my own eyes. I didn't sleep for 3 days. The anxiety was a physical weight crushing my chest, making it impossible to eat or breathe normally. I needed absolute, undeniable proof before I blew my entire world apart. Using the address tied to the secret mortgage payments, I booked a quiet, early morning flight to Portland while Greg thought I was visiting my mother for the weekend. I rented an unassuming sedan and drove to the suburban address listed on the bank statements. The neighborhood was sickeningly normal. It looked exactly like the life Greg had promised me. I parked down the street, slumping low in the driver's seat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited for 2 agonizing hours. Just as I was convincing myself that I had misunderstood the paperwork, the front door of the picturesque house swung open. My lungs forgot how to work. Out walked Greg, dressed in casual weekend clothes I had never seen before. He was smiling, a genuine, relaxed smile that he hadn't directed at me in years. He turned and caught a little boy who ran out the door, the boy from the pediatric bill. "Leo." Greg swung the toddler up onto his shoulders, laughing loudly. A moment later, a pretty, dark-haired woman stepped out onto the porch. She handed Greg a travel mug and kissed him softly on the lips. He leaned into the kiss, completely comfortable, completely at home. The physical toll of the heartbreak was instantaneous and violent. I had to violently open the car door and throw up onto the cold pavement. My vision blurred with hot, angry tears as my brain desperately tried to process the destruction of my reality. I was watching my husband, the man I had vowed to love forever, exist in a completely different dimension. The man I knew was a ghost, a carefully constructed character designed to keep me compliant while he lived his actual life with Alyssa and Leo. I wiped my mouth, put the car in drive, and made a very cold, permanent decision. The flight back home was the longest journey of my life. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to call Greg, to scream through the phone, to tear his clothes out of the closet and burn them on our manicured front lawn. I wanted to destroy the carefully curated reality he loved so much. But as I sat in the cramped airplane seat, staring at the blank seat back in front of me, a terrifyingly cold logic washed over my grief. If I confronted him right now, he would panic. Greg was a master manipulator who controlled all of our primary finances. If he knew I was onto his double life, he would immediately drain our legitimate joint accounts, transfer the remaining assets to his hidden Oregon LLC, and leave me absolutely destitute with a mountain of debt. I could not afford the luxury of an emotional breakdown. I landed, drove to our empty, perfectly decorated house, and immediately called Diane. Diane was a notoriously ruthless, no-nonsense divorce attorney in her 50s who had represented a wealthy client of my interior design business. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered strategy, which was exactly what I needed to survive. Sitting in her cold, intimidating, glass-walled office the next morning, I laid out the bank statements, the LLC paperwork, and the photos I had taken from my rental car. Diane reviewed the documents with surgical precision, her expression completely unreadable. "He's committed marital fraud, dissipation of assets, and depending on what state he married her in, bigamy," Diane said, tapping her expensive pen on the desk. "If you confront him today, you lose your leverage. We are going to lock him in a legal cage before he even realizes the door is shut." Diane instructed me to do the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. I had to go back to my house and pretend absolutely nothing was wrong. I had to smile at the monster who ruined me while I quietly sharpened the knife. The next 7 days were an absolute masterclass in agonizing psychological torture. Diane's instructions were incredibly specific and required absolute secrecy. Following her legal guidance, I systematically went to every single bank where we held joint legitimate accounts. I didn't drain them. That would have triggered an alert. Instead, I quietly secured my exact legal half of the liquid funds and moved them into an untraceable, secure trust account Diane had established. I spent my days acting as a digital ghost, downloading years of tax returns, mortgage documents, retirement portfolios, and credit card statements. I copied every single file from his home office computer onto encrypted flash drives, ensuring his financial history was completely locked down. Meanwhile, Diane was silently preparing a massive, incredibly aggressive at-fault divorce filing that explicitly detailed his fraud, the hidden Oregon accounts, and the second family. The hardest part was the evenings when Greg came home from his demanding job. I had to cook his favorite dinners, ask him about his stressful week, and smile as he complained about how tired he was. When he kissed my cheek, my skin practically crawled with revulsion. I had to stare into the eyes of a man I knew was kissing another woman the day before, and act like I was still his devoted, clueless wife. One night, he even had the audacity to suggest we cancel our upcoming anniversary trip to save money for future investments. I smiled warmly, agreed with his prudent financial planning, and poured him another glass of expensive wine, knowing full well I had already secured the remaining assets. He thought he was the smartest person in the room, playing the perfect puppet master. He had no idea that I had already completely dismantled the massive financial safety net he relied on. The stage was finally set for the most explosive confrontation of his pathetic, deceitful life. It all finally came to a head on a rainy Thursday evening. Greg walked through the front door, dropping his expensive leather overnight bag in the hallway with a heavy sigh. He was supposedly returning from a grueling 3-day logistics summit in Chicago, though I now knew he had actually been attending his secret son's preschool play in Portland. "Hey babe, I'm exhausted," he called out, loosening his silk tie as he walked toward the kitchen. Traffic from the airport was an absolute nightmare today. I was standing on the opposite side of our pristine marble kitchen island. I had dressed carefully that morning, wearing a sharp, tailored outfit, completely abandoning my usual casual suburban look. I didn't say a word as he entered the room. I just watched him. "Chloe, you okay? You look incredibly serious," he chuckled, walking over to the fridge to grab a bottle of sparkling water. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the manila folder resting on the counter. I pulled out the 8x10 glossy photograph I had taken of him holding Leo in the front yard of the Oregon house, and I laid it flat on the marble island. Next, I placed the printed bank statements showing the massive, secret transfers to his hidden LLC. Finally, I set down the thick stack of divorce papers, already signed and notarized by Diane. Greg turned around, taking a sip of his water. His eyes fell to the kitchen island. I watched the exact moment his reality completely fractured. His charming, confident facade melted away in a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. The silence in the kitchen became absolutely deafening. The air felt thick and heavy, charged with years of unspoken lies finally breaking the surface. He stared at the high-resolution photograph of his secret child, his breathing suddenly becoming shallow and incredibly erratic as his brain misfired. I waited for the apologies, but I severely underestimated just how cold my husband truly was. I stood there, bracing myself for the inevitable barrage of tears, begging, and desperate apologies. I expected him to fall to his knees and plead that it was a massive mistake, that he loved me, that he would end it all. But Greg didn't beg. He didn't even apologize for destroying our 10-year marriage. Instead, his eyes darted from the photos to my face, and his first words were a horrifying revelation of his true priorities. "Does Alyssa know? Chloe, did you contact her? You cannot ruin this for me. She doesn't know anything about you." The absolute audacity of his concern punched the remaining breath out of my lungs. He wasn't worried about losing his devoted wife. He was terrified of losing his shiny, hidden life. He immediately pulled out his smartphone, his fingers shaking violently as he frantically tried to open his primary banking app. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to drain our legitimate joint savings accounts to secure his escape and protect his new family from the fallout. I watched him tap the screen, his face turning a sickening shade of pale gray as the access denied and funds unavailable error messages rapidly popped up on his screen. "Where the hell is the money, Chloe?" he demanded, his voice dropping into a vicious, threatening sneer I had never heard before. "What did you do to the joint accounts?" "I legally secured my half, Greg. And my lawyer, Diane, has frozen the rest pending the aggressive divorce discovery phase. You have absolutely nothing left to steal from me." He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, completely abandoning the charming, loving husband persona he had maintained for a decade. He didn't hesitate. He didn't try to save us or even say goodbye. He simply turned around, grabbed his expensive overnight bag from the hallway, and reached into his coat pocket. He had made his choice instantly, choosing them over me. He walked out the front door, leaving me completely alone in the ruins of our life. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, the sound echoing violently through the perfectly decorated, silent house. I stood frozen in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the glossy photographs and the divorce papers scattered across the marble island. Greg was gone. The man I had spent 10 years loving, supporting, and building a future with had just vanished into the night, rushing back to a completely different family. That was the moment the adrenaline finally completely wore off, and the true emotional devastation hit me like a runaway freight train. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold hardwood floor, gasping for air as a primal, agonizing sob ripped its way out of my chest. It is a profoundly bizarre and terrifying kind of grief to mourn a husband who is still very much alive. When someone dies, you get a funeral, casseroles, and closure. When someone completely erases your reality and walks away without a single glance backward, you are left alone to haunt the museum of your dead relationship. Everywhere I looked in that house, I saw the ghost of our fake life. The couch where we planned our future, the dining table where we hosted holidays, the empty driveway where his car used to park. It was all heavily tainted with the poison of his decade-long deception. Harper came over immediately, holding me as I completely fell apart on the living room rug. I cried until I physically couldn't shed another tear, mourning the naive, trusting woman I used to be. I was utterly broken, financially terrified despite Diane's aggressive preparations, and deeply humiliated. But as the sun began to rise, casting a cold, gray light through the expensive suburban windows, my tears finally stopped. The deep, agonizing sorrow slowly began to harden into something entirely different. I realized that crying over a sociopath who stole my future was a massive waste of my time and energy. He wanted me to break. I wiped my face and prepared for the brutal legal war he was about to unleash. Greg was a corporate shark who cared about absolutely nothing more than his pristine public image. His family was extremely conservative and incredibly wealthy, and his employer enforced a strict morality clause for senior partners. If his double life and financial fraud became public knowledge, his entire world would instantly collapse. He knew this, and he panicked. 3 days after he walked out, Diane received a massive package of documents from Greg's newly hired, ridiculously expensive legal team. They were aggressive, condescending, and entirely focused on intimidation. They sent over a severely lowball settlement offer, demanding I accept a pathetic fraction of our remaining marital assets. But the catch was hidden in the aggressively worded fine print. In exchange for the tiny payout, I would have to sign a draconian, ironclad non-disclosure agreement. The NDA explicitly forbade me from ever speaking about Alyssa, his secret child Leo, or the missing hundreds of thousands of dollars to his family, his friends, or his corporate board of directors. If I signed it, our divorce would be filed as a quiet, no-fault separation due to irreconcilable differences. His lawyers threatened that if I didn't sign the NDA quietly, they would drag the divorce out in court for years. They promised to completely bankrupt me with frivolous legal motions, claiming they would easily paint me as a hysterical, greedy, and bitter ex-wife who was making up wild stories to destroy his stellar reputation. Sitting in Diane's cold, intimidating office, reading the deeply insulting settlement offer, I felt a familiar surge of icy rage. He still actually thought he could control me from 3 states away. He still thought I was the obedient, quiet, subservient wife who would automatically sacrifice her own well-being to protect his precious career, his fragile ego, and his new family. Diane looked at me across her large desk, waiting for my final decision. If you want to walk away and heal quietly, Chloe, I can negotiate this number up. But if you want to fight, it will be incredibly ugly. I looked at the NDA. I pushed the settlement away and told my lawyer to absolutely burn his life to ash. I refused to sign the NDA, and I refused to be silenced to protect a monster. Instead of cowering from his expensive lawyer's aggressive threats, Diane and I launched an absolute legal nuclear strike. We immediately filed a massive, entirely public at-fault divorce lawsuit in the local county courthouse. We didn't hide a single detail. The lawsuit explicitly detailed the extreme dissipation of marital assets, laying out the exact dollar amounts Greg had stolen from our joint accounts to fund his hidden LLC. We included the photographs of his second family, the mortgage documents from the Oregon house, and the pediatric dental bills. We formally accused him of systemic financial fraud and bigamy, making every single sordid detail a matter of permanent public record. The exposure was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. Court filings are public, and in a wealthy suburban town, gossip spreads faster than a wildfire. Within 48 hours, Greg's conservative, highly religious parents discovered the truth. His mother called me, hysterically sobbing, completely horrified that her golden child son had been living a monstrous double life. But the ultimate blow came from his corporate employer. The lawsuit's explicit allegations of financial fraud triggered an immediate internal audit at his logistics firm. When his bosses discovered the depths of his deceit and the sheer legal liability he posed to their corporate image, they invoked his morality clause. Greg was unceremoniously fired from his incredibly lucrative senior partner position, immediately losing his massive salary, his annual bonuses, and his unvested stock options. The perfectly curated, successful public image he prized above all else was completely shattered in a matter of days. He had tried to bury me quietly in the dark, completely underestimating the fact that I had the strength to drag his darkest secrets directly into the blinding daylight. He was suddenly facing massive legal fees, furious parents, a destroyed career, and a rapidly collapsing double life. The intimidation tactics had failed spectacularly, and now he had nowhere left to hide. He was finally going to be dragged into a courtroom to face the ultimate legal reckoning. The final showdown happened in a sterile, intimidating deposition room 6 months later. Greg sat across the large mahogany table from me, looking absolutely haggard. He had lost weight. His expensive suit looked slightly rumpled, and the arrogant, charming smirk was completely gone. Without his massive corporate salary, his hidden life in Oregon was rapidly collapsing under the weight of 2 mortgages and mounting legal bills. During the grueling deposition, Diane was absolutely relentless. She forced Greg to systematically admit, under oath and on the official court record, every single fraudulent transfer, every lie, and the existence of his second family. He had to verbally confirm that he had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from his devoted wife to fund a secret fiancée. Hearing him confess the entire horrific truth out loud, completely stripped of his usual manipulative charm, was incredibly validating. When we finally went before the judge for the final verdict, the ruling was swift and brutally satisfying. Because Greg had maliciously dissipated our marital assets to fund a secret life, the judge awarded me full ownership of our beautifully decorated suburban home. Furthermore, the judge ordered Greg to completely repay the stolen funds from his remaining personal retirement accounts and mandated that he cover 100% of my expensive legal fees due to his bad faith actions. Greg was financially ruined. He was left with no job, a massive pile of debt, a destroyed reputation, and an angry fiancée who was suddenly realizing she was tied to a broke, unemployed fraud. The carefully constructed double life he had desperately tried to protect had completely imploded under the heavy weight of the law. As the judge slammed the gavel down, officially terminating our 10-year marriage, I looked over at the man who had completely broken my heart. I didn't feel anger anymore, nor did I feel sadness. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute relief. I had survived the darkest betrayal imaginable and emerged victorious on the other side. I finally stood up, turned my back on my ruined ex-husband, and walked out the door. It has been 2 years since the divorce was finalized, and my life looks completely different today. I sold the massive suburban house, the beautiful sanctuary that had secretly been my prison, and used the substantial funds to open my own successful interior design firm downtown. I live in a bright, modern loft that is entirely mine, completely free from the ghosts of Greg's decade-long deception. Recovering from that level of profound marital betrayal is an incredibly long, painful process. You don't just lose a husband, you lose your entire fundamental trust in reality. But I learned some deeply invaluable lessons through the absolute nightmare. I learned that blind trust is incredibly dangerous. You can love someone with your entire soul, but you must always maintain a clear, comprehensive understanding of your own shared finances. Financial independence and awareness within a marriage are not signs of suspicion. They are absolute necessities for your own safety. If there is any advice I can offer to someone who finds themselves staring at a strange receipt or battling a gut feeling that something is terribly wrong, it is this: always trust your sharpest intuition. Do not let a charming partner or an arrogant spouse gaslight you into ignoring the bright red flags waving right in front of your face. When the absolute worst happens, allow yourself the grace to grieve your lost future, but never, ever let your pain permanently paralyze your actions. Turn your heartbreak into cold, calculated legal strategy and fight fiercely for yourself. Surviving betrayal makes you incredibly resilient. I thought losing my husband would completely destroy me, but it actually forged me into someone entirely unbreakable. I am happier and significantly stronger now than I ever was in that comfortable, fake marriage. The trauma of the past no longer defines my future. It simply serves as a reminder of my own incredible power. The truth will always set you free, but first, it will make you an absolute warrior.